Here's a place where all of us can be safe. Our stories of transformation can be safe, and all the things we want to research are safe here. This is Safe Space with Cheyenne. I'm really excited you're here, and I hope you stick around for a while, because I've got a lot to show you before I leave Earth. I love you guys. Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the Safe Space. Today I have Dr. Karen Parker, and she is the queen of quantum human design from what I'm getting from not only her resume, but how many books she has written. I thought that she had published 10 books. She has actually published up to 24 books. One that I would love to talk about today is called Quantum Wellness, Healing Your Mind, Body, and Soul with Human Design. It is science-backed and spiritually grounded roadmap to reclaiming your purpose and vitality. And friends, you know I am all about finding the most grounded modalities to help you in your everyday life. So I've brought Dr. Karen Parker on today to talk a little bit about her story, how you can get into human design, and what motivated her to work in the quantum human design field. Welcome to the show, Karen.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Where does this story really begin with you? Because I know that there is human design, and then you've taken parts of human design and you've made or built off putting it into, how am I trying to say this, quantum human design. But with someone with 30 years in all of, like, you have a PhD in integrative wellness. Mm-hmm. So I can't imagine like how many clients you went through, all the different healing modalities you went. When you found human design, how did you want to shift and really spend most of your life sharing this message?
It's a long story. I definitely would say, my original degree was in nursing. I didn't make it in nursing for very long because I'm not good at taking orders. So that wasn't a very good career for me. So I quickly, sort of within a couple of years, studied and became a midwife in my early 20s. And at that time, it wasn't as on trend as it is now to do home births. It was still pretty rebellious to have a home birth practice. And, I noticed very early on in my career with working with women doing home births, I kind of started to really develop an intuitive sense of who was going to end up having complications during birth and who wasn't. And a lot of it had to do with the story they were telling. And I could hear the story that they were telling just in the way that they talked, in the way that they shared their vision for what they wanted. And that stuck with me. I didn't end up sticking with being a midwife for very long because I ended up having my own children, and it got hard to balance all of that. But that attention to narrative really sort of kept brewing inside of me for a long time. And I did a lot of different alternative trainings, a lot of different energy medicines, like, modalities. And then sort of magically and serendipitously, I feel like human design found me. And I had the privilege of studying and working with the founder of traditional human design for a couple of years in Sedona, Arizona. And I loved it. To me, it was a way of systematically exploring that story, that core narrative that we tell about who we are and how we are. And that was really delicious and juicy for me to see, okay, here's this very systematic approach that I can use sort of layer by layer in this system to look at people's stories. Now, if you're not familiar with human design is a personality assessment that's a synthesis of Eastern and Western astrology, the Chinese I Ching, the Hindu chakra system, and Judaic Kabbalah. So basically it is, based on your birthday, birth time, and birthplace. It's a system that creates for you an energy map, and it's an energy map that's rooted in ancient and modern archetypes. And really, if you think about an archetype's just a part of a story. So I worked with and studied and kept implementing traditional human design for about 10 years. I left the job that I had and opened up my own practice doing readings and teaching. And sort of along that way, I heard people were coming to me and they were saying, I really love human design. It's really powerful. I can sense that there's something really valid in it, but I don't relate to the language anymore. And they consistently said, if I had studied human design 5 or 10 years ago, I would have related to that language, because I wasn't, at that point, I hadn't started a spiritual practice. I hadn't done all this healing work. I hadn't really shifted my story. But now that I have done this inner work, it doesn't feel like it fits me exactly. It fits the old me, not where I am right now. And that kept getting my attention because enough people were saying that to me that I thought, it's true. Traditional human design, as it was taught and as I learned it, is such an incredibly powerful tool to teach you really who you're not. It helps you identify all those places in your story where you've internalized societal and familial expectations, where you've adopted cultural expectations, where you've learned to follow formulas about these are the things you need to do to be successful, or these are the things you need to do to have money. And really, there's an unraveling that happens in the beginning of learning about your unique energy blueprint through the lens of traditional human design. And most importantly, it's a great tool to get you back into the body, because most of us, to a certain degree, have checked out of our bodies, and our bodies actually give us really important and powerful information about what's right for us and what's not. And when we're following formulas and when we're following what society expects and our family expects, or even things we pick up from our ancestral lineage, what we oftentimes have to do to maintain and sustain those expected patterns of behaviors is we have to numb out the body, right? The body is oftentimes screaming, which is why sometimes, especially when we hit a wall about our authenticity and we really, something inside of us sort of snaps and says, I can't do this anymore. That when we have those experiences, oftentimes it is the body that gives us the first symptom that, hey, you're out of alignment with who you really are. And actually, that's oftentimes the root of burnout. Eventually, I started to see that I didn't want to throw human design away. I saw so much merit in it. And I really began to think about how we could take human design one step further. And actually, when I studied with the founder, he said, and the entire time that I worked for him, that eventually he would evolve the system. But he passed in 2011. And that kind of was an opening for me to say, okay, if we take this system and grow it one more level to where we use language not just to explore who am I not, and we use our understanding of how our energy works to really understand how our energy field influences how we interpret our life experiences. And we start looking at how do we, in conjunction with that, add a new set of vocabulary words that can help us grow into a bigger, more evolved story. What would those words be? And so for 3 years, I actually, I took a Rodale's thesaurus, which is like this thick. And I took all the vocabulary words in traditional human design. And I took this thesaurus and I started testing in a sound lab frequencies of language and measuring, like, if I say this word, what frequency does this word hold? And I recrafted the language of traditional human design with this high frequency language, and I call it quantum human design. It does not replace traditional human design. Well, traditional human design has a very important role for most of us in terms of healing and getting back in the body. But it's the what's next, right? Once you've figured out who you're not, then who do you become? And how do you grow your story from the me, the ego part, to understanding that your story is actually here to be in service to the greater good, or the we, that we all have a life purpose, if you will, that is about ultimately becoming the fullest expression of who we are, and then transcending that and using our stories to be in service to others.
So is it like an energy blueprint that we're kind of getting a sneak peek of ourselves in?
It's both. I mean, it definitely will tell you how you use energy, and it certainly shows you how you potentially are translating your experience of energy. For example, some of us are emotional empaths by design. And so when you are an emotional empath, that means that you probably cultivated a couple of predictable behavioral patterns as a coping strategy because you are very sensitive. So it's very common for people who are emotional empaths to become people pleasers, right? Because one of the ways to control the emotional energy in the room is to keep everybody else happy. Or you might have become, the canary in the coal mine in your family, so to speak. You might be the one that everybody thinks is dramatic, but you're not actually really that dramatic. You're just taking in everybody else's feelings and you're the one that's expressing them. But the other thing that is, it's also, it is a map for how you use energy, but it's also, I'll say it's also your soul curriculum. It really tells you what are core archetypal themes that you are going to be exploring and learning through and sometimes pushing up against over the arc of your life.
Okay, so it's definitely not, I know there's a lot of quick fixes that everybody wants with this stuff. So it's not like a fad diet. You're not gonna drop all of your drama in a week after just looking at a chart. Like, it takes some time to move through the chart, to find the blocks, to see the limiting beliefs you have in your head, the generational trauma you're carrying around, and the societal expectations, are just all of the views that everybody else built and gave up to you. To me, it sounds like a very kind way to like break yourself apart and really investigate yourself with a nice guide.
I like that. I like that because it's, I keep telling, I keep telling my business manager, he's like, but we can't tell people it's going to take work. But I'm like, but it really does take work, but it doesn't have to be hard. It can be fun. It can be creative. I think sometimes when we think about, oh, you have to do the work, sometimes and you'll see memes like on social media of like the shadow side and your whole life shattering. And sure, sometimes that does happen, but also sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you can take control over the healing process and make it, as you said, kind and gentle and intentional. And I don't think there's a way around. Well, here's why I don't think there's a way around the work, because what does it mean? I'm going to say we don't not heal. Healing is a good place to start, but healing is the baseline, right? Healing is the baseline. When we heal, we bring ourselves back to baseline. That's like being a survivor, right? We tend to call ourselves, and we kind of celebrate, I'm a survivor. But if you really break down the word survival or the word survivor, what does that really mean? It just means you lived. Right? You're like Harry Potter, the boy who lived, right? And that's awesome. But Harry Potter's story doesn't end with the boy who lived, right? There's a whole redemption arc after that. And when we, when we're telling stories of survival, or when we're healing, we discount the redemption arc that comes afterwards. And so that's a never ending quest, right? There's no end point to how far you can grow, how far you can optimize yourself. And, I think that if we start exploring the idea of optimization and recognizing that, you're not going to be like, okay, that's it, I'm grown. Now I'm going to be grown for the rest of my life. You're not. You're always going to be growing. And that's actually the fun and juicy part, I think.
Very great points. And you're right about that. I'm going through like different experiences I've had from just observing different groups or like healing groups that I've been in. And one of the main themes that I've seen in the almost like awareness epiphany stage of like why someone acts the way they do because something happened to them back then, they almost get stuck on that trauma like a diagnosis that they've adopted, where now, well, I understand why I am like this. And then they stop there. They use it as an excuse to not heal and not move forward. Is there something in the design that teaches you how to find these traumas or these patterns and then go work with the awareness of it, accept what happened to you, and then continue to move on so you can also quit making that trauma a part of your story? You can grow away from it. Because I always hear that you really do have to let go of the old and let go of the past to move on to the new you. And eventually one day you don't even have to talk about what happened to you. You're so healed, unless you're obviously a speaker on a platform, wrote a book, and that's kind of your niche. Mm-hmm. But how do we move people out of that awareness phase of this is how I am, this is why I am the way I am, but I'm not stuck this way, and then help them evolve to the greater steps of their healing and their authentic self?
Well, one of the things that I came up with when I was exploring how do we evolve the language, I started really taking the chart apart. And when I say I'm taking the chart apart, it's not really about the chart. It's really about looking at the relationship between all of these different ancient esoteric systems like the I Ching or the Kabbalah or the Hindu chakra system or even astrology, and recognizing that if we really look at these systems analytically, there really are just some basic core human stories that are duplicated and have been duplicated in these systems for thousands of years. The human story is not that complicated. And if one of the things that I did is I started looking at these archetypes and blending them into child development and adult developmental theory. And what I came up with is that if we take all of these ancient and modern esoteric archetype based systems, if we like put them in a blender and blended them up with, say, Eric Erickson's work, or Richard Barrett, who's done some amazing work in the last 10 years on adult developmental seasons, and sort of put all of that together, what we'd see is that at the core are 9 base archetypes that I call the resiliency keys, that are really key energies associated with being resilient. And what I find is that self-awareness is a very important first step. And being able to say, I'm a this, or I have that, or I had this experience, that's part of that getting yourself back to baseline, right? Recognizing that, okay, I had this experience. And to a certain degree, at a certain point in that journey, the label is actually validating. It has a function, right? And we don't want to not use those labels, because they help us understand this happened to me and this was my experience. But at a certain point, if we don't look at what's underneath staying static, which means you get to that baseline and you're like, okay, done, I'm a survivor, right? If we don't look underneath and say, okay, what might be underneath here that I also need to explore? For example, some of the 2 really most important resiliency keys are lovability and self-worth. And if we don't love ourselves and value ourselves, then it's very hard for us to grow, because we think, A, if I grow, I might lose the people I love, or I might not be lovable anymore as myself. Or if we heal our self-worth, right, we're going to have to set boundaries. We're going to have to possibly, risk some of those losses again that we might risk when we heal, or continue to heal the story. And so I find that when people are really embracing the label and they're sort of like done, that oftentimes we have to go a level deeper and say, all right, what's the fear associated around continuing the healing work? And it makes sense. I mean, I think that is a place that calls for tremendous self-compassion, because when we receive an injury to the self in the first place, and I really consider that to be PTSD. I mean, I would say PTSD exists on a spectrum. And I think anytime we internalize the message that it's not okay or safe, or I can't be loved and valued for who I am or for how I am, we react to that story in a defensive way. And that defensive way really mimics on a neurological level full-blown PTSD. So it's not full-blown PTSD. That's oftentimes a result of macro trauma, but those little micro traumas where somebody says this about you and somebody says that about you, and you take it in and you internalize it, the body reacts to that in the same way neurologically. We freeze, we have flashbacks, we anytime the body starts to encounter, because memory is not just cognitive, right? Memory is physiological. And when we smell or sense or feel something that feels similar to those experiences, we react and we get into a defensive position neurologically. And that defensive position has saved us. It's served us for our lifetimes, oftentimes. And part of going beyond the label means you have to not only change your mind and find the courage, but you also have to find ways to regulate yourself so that you can continue that growth journey beyond the label. And again, that involves so much of getting back into the body and really recovering our capacity to choose for our authentic self. And that's a practice. It's a practice. Anytime we do with anything on the neurological level, it's a practice, because our neurobiology is all about patterns. And so we have to establish new patterns.
So are you able to use other modalities? Like when you say these stories we tell ourselves, these limiting beliefs, like EFT keeps coming to mind when I think about like retraining. I like how you use certain words, certain affirmations, but then also you're connecting like the body with the tapping and doing all that. Everybody, whether they're a practitioner, a coach, or a client of EFT, have said that they just made breakthroughs that they didn't even realize was there. So when you come to this point where you realize, okay, I have like almost this virus in my program that I've pinpointed.
Yeah.
Do you interject other modalities with clients or recommend them to make a new program, basically?
So we actually have integrated the quantum human design with EFT. We have an entire training, a whole system called the quantum alignment system that integrates EFT. And in addition to EFT, we also integrate it with flower essences and healing sound frequencies, so that when you make the shift on the neurocognitive level, right, or on the nervous system level, and then I find that we get better results if we also support the energy field itself. So we then complement what the work we do with combining EFT and human design with flower essences and sound frequencies, because each one of those archetypes, this goes back to the work I did in the sound lab, each one of those archetypes has a frequency, and we can keep the body tuned to that frequency while the nervous system is making the adjustments that it needs to make to be able to rewire the body in a more aligned, more authentic way.
Mm-hmm. You have a tremendous amount of study, and every time I picture you in a sound lab, I just get super giddy with anybody with your background and your level of education really taking this science serious and giving it like the credentials I think that it needs, because there's so many people that are doing like sound baths, all these different types of modalities, but yours, it really is just so grounded. And then the fact that you just brought in EFT and sound frequencies, like I just got like light up my spine hearing all of this.
Well, okay. So here's something to think about. And this is the place that I walk as an applied scientist, and I suspect you walk in that same place too. So when I first learned EFT, I studied EFT with Gary Craig in 2000 when he did his very first big training of EFT. At that time, I was a registered nurse. I studied in the room, studying along with me were all these therapists. And, you know, there were at that time, literally at that time, people were losing their licenses for using EFT in their practices it was considered inappropriate touching, right? And I gave up my license because I saw when I used EFT, I saw so quickly that, hey, the empirical results, there weren't, science results at this point, although now we have like more than 15,000 peer-reviewed studies on EFT. But at that point, we didn't have that. But the empirical results were just like mind-blowing what I saw happen with EFT sometimes. And so I gave up my license, and a lot of people did. When we bring something new into the field of healing, it's, especially nowadays, it's often starting out here on, I don't know, I don't want to call it the fringe because that sounds sort of discounting, but we'll say on the edges of application, right? And it sort of mutates out here. And then eventually somebody gets, pays attention to it, and they start doing research on it, which is actually what I did with human design, because, I eventually took human design for my PhD, for my dissertation, and used the structure of the chart to do research on immune response to personal narrative. But it always starts out here on this edge, and it sort of, we'll say it's where mutation in the system starts. So it mutates out here on the edge, and eventually with repetition and consistency, and eventually with good science, because good science helps us really recognize the validity. With good science, we can then take these things that we're experimenting with and start to integrate them into our healing toolkit. You can do it anyway, again, with the awareness that you may be, pre-science. You may be doing pre-science. We'll call it that. You may be experimenting without the structure yet. It doesn't make it less valid. It is fun though when we can start marrying it with good science, because science. Here's the thing. And this is a whole nother podcast episode, but I have to go here for a minute, because I think right now, in the time that we're at, it's November 2025 as we're recording this, that, misinformation is pretty rampant, and it's easy to get confused about what things mean. And I think when we say things like, it's a scientific fact, there's actually no such thing as a scientific fact. Science is math. It's just the math of statistics. And it's just a tool that measures probability. And certainly anytime we do science, or anytime, you have any kind of an experience in the world, you have the possibility of having a result that's outside the predicted result, right? That's what we call a miracle, right? A miracle is just something that happens outside of the predicted results. But there's no such thing as a scientific fact. There's just the possibility or the probability that something, you can get the same result consistently if you do the same thing. And when we can set up our understanding of healing with that level of predictability, and we can demonstrate that level of predictability, it makes it easier and easier for us to integrate it into how we heal people. Right now, we have a health crisis in our country where the system is not meeting the needs of people. It's probably, I'm not trying to be a doomsayer, but I can't see how the system is going to be sustained with some things that are happening in the healthcare system. We are in a really opportune time to begin to start integrating into the way we help people not just heal, but help people stay healthy. I think our perspective on staying healthy is going to shift dramatically as access to healthcare continues to become challenging. And I really don't want to sit here and make light of it, because obviously if you really genuinely need healthcare and you can't access it, that's a tragedy. Mm-hmm. And the idea that we could get more proactive about staying well and looking at wellness through an integrated approach is really, I think, exciting, and makes a lot of room for people who are exploring and experimenting out here on this edge, doing things like sound healing or tapping or whatever.
I appreciate how you're like, it's out on the edge. It is really hard to categorize things, especially when you've had your own direct experience with them. So you know what the narrative and the mainstream is about certain things, but you've had such amazing experiences, just like you with your reviews, and even looking at all the peer reviews from EFT and even quantum human design. I'm curious, with people living so out of alignment for so long, and then something happening, getting them to do some type of work, how do they find out when they're in alignment? How does that really come through on the healing process?
Well, that's also a good question, because that's I like to think of it as like learning to ride a bike, right? You start off with training wheels. That's sort of the healing part, right? And eventually you lift those training wheels up, and then you're kind of wobbly, and you watch the kid going down the street and they're wobbling, but then eventually they kind of land into that place of alignment. But if you think about riding a bike, I mean, you always are at risk for being out of alignment, right? You hit a bump, a cat runs in front of you, right? That there's a balance in riding a bike, and it's always a process of staying upright on the bike and keeping it rolling forward without tipping over. And I think alignment is kind of like that. So I also want to shatter the illusion that, again, we're aligned and we're going to always be aligned for the rest of our life, because you're not. You're going to grow. You're going to outgrow your story, and you're going to get out of alignment because you grew, and you're going to have to rewrite a new story, get on a different bike, right? Maybe you'll ride a unicycle. So, I certainly would say, though, when you are in alignment, you feel well in your body. You have vitality. And that I use the word vitality intentionally, because you can be struggling with a chronic illness and still have vitality. That's the capacity to harness your life force energy in a way that brings joy into your body. You will experience, usually what I see is people will experience a better relationship with money, because oftentimes there's a relationship, I've found, at least in the work that I do, between unhealed trauma, in particular unhealed self-worth, and our capacity to hold wealth consciousness. You'll see your relationships will improve because now you're being real, right? And you're actually asking for what you need and want, instead of devolving to, hidden motivations and and secret agendas about getting your needs met in unhealthy ways. You come across your life path and your life purpose, your passion. It might not always be your work, but you'll find something in your life that drives you, that connects you. I mean, your life will start to feel good. And I think that's probably the most general way I can describe what does alignment feel like, and how do you know you're in alignment. And again, it's kind of interesting. It's not like you're going to go to bed one night and the next morning wake up like, bing, I'm alive. It'll happen gradually, and it really happens choice by choice by choice, which is why getting back into the body and building a trusting relationship with the body and really being able to say, this feels right for me, or this doesn't feel right for me, and having the courage to let yourself follow that is huge.
You remind me of two things. Another one of my guests talked about when she started her healing journey and looking through all the ways to help herself. Her mindset at the beginning was, oh, if I can just figure out this sustainment of happiness, then I know that I've arrived and I know that I've made it. Mm-hmm. And throughout all the pitfalls of her experience, she was like, what a very naive thing to think that I'm going to hit this finish line. I'm going to hit happiness, and then all the darkness will go away forever and nothing bad will ever happen to me again. And because she had those experiences and that epiphany, she is okay with riding the roller coaster of the emotions, where even if it's like a cloudy day in your mind, it doesn't mean that I'm completely out of alignment, that something's wrong, that my frequency is completely off. I'm just kind of going through the motions of it. And she's respected her journey a lot more without having that illusion of happiness. And in your work, I think it's the illusion of consistent alignment.
Totally. And I think, it's really kind of fun. There's this whole series of research studies that came out this year. It was an aggregate of 8 different studies looking at using the hero's journey as a template for healing self-worth. And what they found is that if we start reframing our life and kind of seeing ourselves as the hero in our story, and we start encountering these challenges, and those challenges are ultimately an opportunity for us to either, gain some kind of a reward or up level ourselves. You want to use a video game analogy. If we start seeing our lives as those speed bumps that are actually essential to our growth, as places where our hero encounters a challenge and we can surmount those challenges and emerge, even at a new level, it actually increases our resiliency. It increases our capacity to be able to navigate challenges. It also increases our ability to stay, hold on to equanimity in the midst of all of that shifting and changing. So you can be the calm in the storm, and actually be the one that can influence people when things, go south. So I love that awareness, because, I'm 60 years old. This is more practical advice than scientific. Life is long. And it's long enough for you to figure it out. I tell my kids that all the time. They don't like it, but it's true. It's long enough for you to figure it out. And it's long enough for you to get the rug pulled out from under you a couple of times, and it's not the end. And I think that there's a little bit of hubris in all of us to think that we could just click our heels 3 times together, have a positive outlook, and whoop, nothing bad will ever happen. There's mystery sometimes in our life story. We don't know why things happen. My best friend's 16-year-old son died of leukemia. And, I don't think why is the right question to ask, because I don't think there's an answer to that question. But, the real question is, what's next? How do we take this experience, this tragedy that, we can't always avoid tragedy. How do we take these experiences and internalize them into our narrative, and ultimately use them as a catalyst for our purpose and our story, and ultimately as a place of service for others?
That's amazing that you're able to use this system. I feel like the system makes you ask the right questions, because I think why is such a big one, especially with the story that you just brought up. Why did this happen? Mm-hmm. Intense amount of suffering and grief, which obviously would be in that scenario, but to, as you said, almost like zoom out and see, well, what are we going to do with this? It feels like a very science-backed transmutation process. It's mm-hmm. a very, very nice way of using alchemy in your verbiage for that, but that is the right mindset to do that.
I love alchemy. That's a very high frequency word, by the way.
Lovely. Okay, so let's get into this language thing where you measured how different words, because obviously it's going to affect our body, but for a beginner that is like, what do you mean words have energy and have power and have frequencies. How are you able to get them to understand that not only like the narrative that they're saying in their head, but the words that they're speaking out in the world hold a vibration that can either like pull you up or pull you down?
Well, let's start first with words and vibrations, because certainly words carry specific frequencies of energy, but also words are describing a set of meanings, right? And when we start really paying attention to language and the meanings that they hold, it gets very interesting. So I'm going to talk about something that's a little creepy, but I think it's a really interesting way to look at language.
I'm here for it.
Okay, good. So let's think about how we in our culture never use the term underaged men. We never use that term, right? We call an underaged man a boy, and a boy is a child, right? But in our culture, we frequently use the phrase underaged women, right? And if you think about what is an underaged woman, well, an underage woman is a girl, and a girl is a child. But because of the sexual nature of feminine energy and how, where those lines are with sexuality, and certainly where the lines get very blurry sometimes in our cultural narrative, we say this term all the time, and we don't really think about what's the meaning underneath this when we really say that. What's the permissibility that happens when we stop calling a girl and we start calling her an underage woman? We're just using different words, right? And those words have frequencies, but they also have very subtle shifts in the meanings. And so if I say money and then I say the word wealth, technically they're kind of, there's crossover there, but it has different connotations, right? So the words we choose, first of all, oftentimes belie the underlying meaning. The meanings are really part of what's important here. It's not just the frequency of the words, it's also the meanings that the words hold. And that can become very personal, right? So if I say the word money, and you all are listening and you're listening, if I say the word money and if I say, I want you to think about everything that comes to mind when you think of the word money. Well, if we start making a bulleted list, if I was doing this in a live class, people would write things in the chat like, power, freedom, scary. I don't know if I have enough. Wouldn't it be nice to have some, right? People have all kinds of different meanings behind the word money. What happens in the body is that when we hear the word money, or we see an image of money, it causes our brain to produce a photon storm. So it's a storm of light, because that's part of how the nervous system functions. That photon storm is going to cause your body to produce a set of neurotransmitters. Those neurotransmitters in turn are going to stimulate a specific emotional response in the body, because the neurotransmitters you produce are going to be tied to your beliefs and your meanings that you have around money. So if you have an expectation like money comes to me every day in the mail, right? And you really believe that and you live like that, when you hear the word money, you're like, oh, I can't wait for the mail to come, right? That creates neurotransmitters that produce an energy of anticipation and excitement, right? Or if you're at the end of the month and you're like, I don't know how I'm going to make rent, and I say the word money, that's going to trigger neurotransmitters that might create, a fear response. So our meanings that we have around an archetype or a part of a story are influencing how our body reacts. Now, if you have high quality emotions in response to an archetype like money, because money is just an exchange of value, that's going to put your body into a state of heart coherence, meaning your mind and your body and your energy will all be flowing together. The creative parts of your brain will stay open and elevated, and you'll be in a much more creative state, rooted much more in physiological well-being. And your ability to see opportunities for money or to experience money in a positive way goes up. If you have negative meanings, it'll trigger a low-grade fight or flight response or a stress response. And when we get into stress, the most important thing, there's a lot of stuff that happens when we get into stress, but when we have stress, the brain starts to shut down. The creative part of yourself shuts down, because When you're under stress, think about running from a bear. You don't want to be creative. You're not searching Google. You're not looking for opportunities. You're like fight or flight. I need to run from the bear. When we have stress responses to archetypes or parts of a story, we do the same thing. Our body shuts down. We get into reactive mode instead of creative mode. Our brain shuts down, and the body is actually not in a state of wellness either, because you can't sustain that level of stress over time without damaging the body at a certain point.
That research that you were talking about reminds me of when I came across mirror neurons. I was going through anything quantum that I could find. And it really does teach you that you are the creator of your own reality with the way that you populate language in your brain. But the way that you broke it down is extremely grounded and makes a tremendous amount of sense to me as far as like a healing journey and how to really inspect how you're talking to yourself or the language that you build with the world. Because I've had those moments where money was like a scarcity mindset to me. And then I really dug into a lot of literature about it, about like, well, why do I think that way about money, whether it's a grandiose idea or a scarcity idea? But the way that you brought that up was extremely palatable. I like that.
Well, I'll add one other piece to that too. We can have positive meanings about something, but going back to resiliency, if our beliefs about our lovability and our self-worth are low, we can say, okay, I have all these positive meanings about money, but not for me. And so we also have to do that work, which to me is really the gift of using human design or any other modality that helps you fall in love with yourself, because we really do have to love ourselves and value ourselves in order to allow ourselves to receive the positive effects of all those beliefs that we have.
I wanted to be like the guinea pig beginner in this episode. So I went to quantumhumandesign.com and I put all my information in, get my chart sent to me. And I looked at it and immediately I had a great feeling. Like when I saw the chart, you know, when you're like getting ready to investigate parts about yourself and you're like, I'm about to find something new about myself. Not that I wasn't overwhelmed. I was more curious and I wanted to know, as a beginner, how do you actually interpret the chart? Do you take classes? Do you book a one-on-one with you? Because looking at it, there's a lot of information that I think needs digested over time. I don't think you're just going to find everything out in one, but even to understand why the chart looks this way, what are all of these numbers on the side? And then even when we get into like the archetype aspect of like the generator, the manifesting generator, projector, all of that, as a beginner, what is the best step to take to really understanding your chart and then implementing it into your healing?
Well, I'd say the first step is get your chart. Where if you go to our website, it's freehumandesignchart.com, you get a nice little report with it. That's a good place to start because it'll give you some things to think about and chew on. I certainly always recommend that once you get your chart, get a reading if you can, because it is a complex system. It's inherently simple. There's some simple bits of information that can get you started on your journey right away. And certainly those are probably the paramount steps to take in really integrating your authentic self with human design. But certainly somebody who can sit down and help you synthesize all those parts into a cohesive story is just an incredible catalyst to reframing your life story. And I mean, that's probably where I would start. It takes me a good year to really train somebody to do it professionally. So it is a pretty extensive body of knowledge. The heart of the system lies in, so when you did your chart, what was your type?
I have it pulled up here.
Okay.
When you say type, you mean like manifesting generator?
Yes.
Okay. I'm manifesting generator.
It's so funny. Most podcast hosts are either manifesting generators or projectors. So
good thing, right? I don't know.
So in human design, there are 5 different energy types. So you're going to be born as one of those 5 types, and that your type stays the same over the span of your life. I like to think of the type as kind of being the main character in your story. Your type tells you a lot about how you create, what you're here to do, what your learning style is. So as a manifesting generator, first of all, you are a type who is designed to do many things at once. You're a multitasker. Which is why I secretly think a lot of manifesting generators become podcast hosts, because they have so many curiosities about things. It's like their way to get their questions answered, right? So you have all kinds of different guests on to answer all your questions and curiosities.
That's so fun.
You're designed to do many things at once. You have a tremendous amount of energy, but the challenge is burning off that energy on a daily basis. So for manifesting generators, you've got to move and groove, and oftentimes really move and groove your body. And certainly what'll happen for you is you might start 5 things, and 3 of those things might pop and really become something, and 2 of those things might not. And part of why you did those other 2 things was A, there was something in there for you to learn, but B, it was also a way for you to burn off that extra energy. What we oftentimes do for the manifesting generators, we tell them, you need to slow down and pick one thing. And that's actually a death knell for a manifesting generators. First of all, it's like almost impossible. And secondly, that actually causes you to have to hold on to energy and get really, really frustrated, because frustration can be one of the emotional themes for a manifesting generator. Manifesting generators have a stair-step learning curve. So what that means for you is that when you learn something in the beginning, you're pretty good at it pretty fast. And then at a certain point, you hit a wall or a plateau. And that's normal for you. So if you started to play tennis in the beginning, you would start to learn how to hit the ball. And then eventually you would you'd hit a sort of a plateau where no matter how much you practiced and how much lessons you took, you weren't making any progress. A lot of manifesting generators, when they hit those plateaus, they quit. And so it's very common for manifesting generators to be in cycles of start, stop, quit, start, stop, quit, start, stop, quit. And that actually can be also very frustrating. And part of the reason why that can be frustrating is that leads you to never really becoming masterful, because you are constantly starting, stopping, and quitting, and never waiting for that next level of growth that happens when you learn how to sit with the frustration and not bail. And eventually, if you can learn to sit with that frustration, you get, you'll have another breakthrough and another surge in mastery until you'll hit another plateau. As a manifesting generator, you tend to leapfrog over plateaus. So sometimes you skip steps. That's normal for you. And sometimes you have to go back and fix the steps you skipped. And sometimes you don't, because ultimately in quantum human design, we call you a time bender. So manifesting generator is your baseline. As a time bender, you're here to find the fastest, most effective way to do things, and actually teach people how to basically bend time by finding the most effective way to do things.
I feel so called out in like the most positive way. I think that's what I also like about human design. Nothing feels like too heavy and too revealing at the same time. You're just like, yes, there's so many stories popping up in my head where this aligns deeply with me.
Good. I'm glad.
Okay. My next question on it is, so there's a part that says evolutionary and then it says sacral. So that's where it's bringing the chakra system in. What does that mean? Like, what does evolutionary mean, and why is it identified as sacral in my chart specifically?
So there are what are called 9 energy centers in the chart system. So those centers correlate loosely to the 7 chakras from the Hindu chakra system. So one of the centers is called the sacral center, or the sacral center, which correlates to the Hindu chakra system and the sacral chakra. In traditional human design, we call it the sacral center. In quantum human design, that's the baseline. In quantum human design, we call it the evolutionary center. So it's the same energy. It's just the evolutionary energy is the more evolved. What that means for you is that that's what's called your authority. Your authority is the healing path, and everybody's chart has an authority, and there are 5 different authorities in quantum human design. That's the path that gets you back into the body. So your authority is getting out of your head and dropping into your gut and feeling and sensing from your gut what feels right for you and what doesn't. And there's a little bit of a hack for you with the sacral authority. And that hack is you can actually tune into that with sound. That sacral center actually makes one of 2 sounds, and that is uh-huh and uh-uh. And part of learning to sort of respond to life with those sounds, like you see, let's say if you go to a French bakery and you're looking at all the pastries and you let yourself say, that's the one that I want. What happens is when we make those sounds, we're bypassing the mind. And the mind is not your enemy. You need your mind. It does great things, like it dreams, it imagines. It's good for analyzing data if you do research, right? But it's not always the most dependable place to make decisions. In fact, if you study the brain is actually not very complicated. It has a lot of parts, but it really is pretty simple, and it's kind of dumb. I love the brain, but it's pretty simple. It just thinks in stories, right? And you can convince it of just about anything, which is why it's also not a good place to go for your memory. If you can get out of this thinking part of yourself and drop into that visceral, sacral place and start making those sounds, it bypasses all the talk in your head. And it allows you to really start navigating your decisions from a more visceral place. And again, I am not saying completely abandon your mind, right? You might say, I want to go to Maui, but I only have $5 in my bank account. So you might have a conundrum there that you have to figure out if you really want to go to Maui. But it does allow us, especially in those life, those bigger life choices, to really feel our way into, does this feel right for me or not? Because we've, most of us, as I said, tune that out. And when we tune that out, and we're only making decisions from up here, we run the risk of making decisions from a more conditioned identity than from what's viscerally and authentically true for us.
So it really does show you how to tap into your body instead of thinking for opportunity or looking just in a thinking mentality. It's feeling for opportunity. It's feeling for growth. Mm-hmm. And it is, I would say, back to that heart coherence is what I'm getting from, obviously you still need your mind. You don't want to disregard it, but also bring in that sacral path as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
That's very interesting. Okay. And then at the bottom of the chart, we just have like a range of numbers. So there's 4 categories. What is it, like? Innovative thinking, responsive power, but it's like, and I just needed an example. I'm not looking for you to read my whole chart, but I want the beginners to really understand what they're unfolding in here. It says a range of 43 to 23, innovative thinking. And then in parentheses, it says structuring. So are they pulling all of this from the chart? And then if you would break that down.
If you look at your chart, you'll see that there are 9 geometric shapes on the chart, and there are colored in lines that connect some of the shapes, and those shapes that are connected are also colored in. So in between those shapes, there's what's called channels. That's actually a really complex part of the chart. It's not where I would start for a beginner, but basically what that lays out is it tells you what are some of the ongoing themes that are part of what I would call your soul curriculum, and potentially part of what I would call your sacred flaw in your story. So let's look at that 4323 that's connecting the green triangle to the throat. So that channel in your chart that's all about structuring means you're here to change the way people think. And when you think about things, you have an intuitive knowingness, and you know things, and you don't always know how you know that you know, but you know. And sometimes explaining to other people what you know is hard because A, you have to wait for the language to drop in. And B, if they're not ready to hear what you know, because what you know is going to change the way that they think, they might think you're a little weird, right? And so
now I'm dead.
So part of what you have to do is you have to learn how to stay true to your own knowingness and not let your own knowingness be corrupted by other people doubting you or your inability to explain it to people who aren't ready to hear what you have to say yet.
That is a wonderful read, but I just love how you're like, they're going to think you're a little weird. I'm like, I'm an Aquarius. I completely understand people thinking that I'm weird. And especially in the line of work that I do. I mean, yes, 100%. Okay. Well, I think I've given enough like beginner feels. I don't want to give too much away because I definitely encourage people to get someone to read their chart for them. But that is, I mean, just icing on the cake for me. I'm definitely going to have somebody read through all of that because I just think that's so cool. I'm like losing my verbiage for it. But another thing that I'm thinking about,
what'd you say? That's because of your 4323. So.
Yeah, perfect. Another rabbit hole. It's exactly what I need. Since doing the birth chart stuff to get all of my information, it reminded me of when I gave birth to my daughter. I was like adamant on her being an Aquarius because I'm an Aquarius and my husband's an Aquarius. And obviously it all timed out. I didn't plan it that way. But when she was actually coming into the world, all I could think about after I gave birth to her was, honey, like, make sure you give me all the things that I need for a birth chart. So after I have her, they're rolling me back into my room. And by the time I got back into my room and settled with my nausea medication,
Mm-hmm.
I typed her birth chart in and I just started reading her chart.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went over and obviously I wasn't educated on human design at the time, but I went and then I checked like anything on gene keys that would pull up for her based on that as well. So are we able as parents to really use this for our children to help them not only with their life's path, but anything that is developing in them right now?
So I actually teach an entire family coach certification training where I teach people how to use the chart in that way. It's an incredible tool to help you. Here's how I think of it. And I have 8 kids, right? I feel like as parents, we are stewards for our children, right? We get given this incredible being, and our job isn't to raise them up, but rather to create an environment within which they can unfold. And I certainly feel like knowing my children's human design has made it so much easier for me to really be a steward for their lives until they're ready to, stand on their own 2 feet and take off in their own life.
That's amazing. Okay. So yes, I can use this on my 5-year-old and it'll help me.
Absolutely.
I used her birth chart the best I could, but still, we've definitely had some cliffhangers. And I did take a Gene Keys course like while I was pregnant with her, because when I really got into epigenetics and generational trauma, I was trying to cut as many cords as I could before she came. And then obviously we were going through the parenting stuff. I had to live in the awareness that I was still stuck in a lot of patterns.
Mm-hmm.
So she's been a tremendous coach for me, but anything that I can add to like help her on her path is something I'm obviously willing to invest in. Okay, let's get into your authorship, Miss. I published 24 books and I'm so inspired by you. Your latest one is called Quantum Wellness, Healing Your Mind, Body, and Soul with Human Design. Mm-hmm. Is this going to teach people how to get into it, modalities of how to use or modalities to use after you've looked at the chart? Like what is in this book that you want people to know about?
So I actually think this is probably the easiest human design book that I've written in terms of making human design accessible. Basically what it does is it breaks the chart down into layers and supports you in exploring layer through layer in the chart. What stories are you telling about yourself? And how do you reinterpret that story in such a way that it is going to benefit you? It's definitely not, it's definitely more of a workbook than a book. I mean, if you really actually get in there and do the work, which I encourage you to do, it's going to take you, it'll take you a month maybe to go through all of the exercises and the contemplations, but it's really an exhaustive and extensive process of analyzing your narrative and deciding for yourself which part of this story that is you do you want. Are you sovereign over? Do you choose? And it gives you a very systematic way to recraft your story your way with you being in charge of it.
I like that. As a person who loves to obviously go work with people, but really I feel empowered when I can do my own work, when I can sit down. So I love that you say it's more of a workbook format. It's going to take you time to get in. I've always believed, again, bringing up Gene Keys one more time, that workbook is like a companion for life. The book is like this thick. Sometimes you feel like doing on it. Sometimes you don't feel like doing on it. I can personally say I have not looked at my Gene Keys book in a long time, but human design, the times that I've looked at it, even though I was obviously confused with the chart in the beginning and needed a reading, the times I've looked at it, I've always picked up something about myself that I could identify with, whether it was me saying it was a positive or a negative thing about me. I can still live in the awareness of it and go, that is true. And then get really curious of, well, how does this chart understand me so well? How does this chart have these answers for me that I didn't know I was capable of finding?
So I have not studied Gene Keys. I don't know what it is in me. I have never been able to study anybody else's human design based work. And Richard originally started in human design and then took it in his own really beautiful direction. And I love Richard's work and I love Richard. And the way that I kind of see it is they're very complementary. And I wouldn't say one is one you wouldn't refer to and one you would necessarily. I think quantum human design is really more about your main character. And I think Gene Keys really lays out what path do you want to take your main character on. And so I actually really love the idea of playing with them together, because I think they really can complement each other quite beautifully.
I felt that. I think I was just overwhelmed with using two systems at one time when I was looking at them. I like both the charts. A lot of them did say the same thing, but since they both have their own language,
Mm-hmm.
it's like, okay, let's take some time and do it. But you're right, they are complementary. And maybe you've inspired me to, I mean, not only get the human design reading, because definitely I would need help with my chart, but maybe you've inspired me to open my book again. We'll see.
Well, I hope so, because Richard is very inspiring. So.
Yeah. I still get the emails every month, and I love seeing, Gene Key 64, this is what we're working on. And it is kind of crazy how it feels like a scientific astrology reading for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
A lot of the emails are super aligned. So no way, shape, or form am I talking about Gene Keys. If anything, I'm talking about my inconsistencies in some of the modalities that I've used, getting me tongue-tied. Okay, so you teach people this system as well so they can become coaches.
Correct.
Yes. Okay, so if I want to do a workshop with you, have you be my coach, what is the best way to contact you, get a hold of you? Obviously, we can find your book down below on the show notes, but what's the best way to contact you?
So go to our website, quantumhumandesign.com, and all the information about our trainings are there. And also listings of all of our practitioners are there too. So you can find a practitioner who maybe is your same type, or somebody who you resonate with, or somebody who's in your geographical area. We've got hundreds of people on our list that you can go find and work with as well.
Are you able to do the coaching like online, or does it have to be in person?
So it depends on what practitioner you choose. We have, people do online. We have a lot of people who do online stuff because it's easier and everybody got used to it during COVID, but certainly people coach in person too. And I teach in person, and I coach online and in person. So.
Okay. And then your last bit of advice for anybody that wants to get on whether a human design journey, a healing journey, or just realizing something needs to be changed, but they don't know how to do it. What would you recommend?
Don't end your story at the cliffhanger. Just, you got to complete the chapter and don't ignore the redemption arc. So if you're feeling stuck, you're feeling like everything is disrupted, you see that as an opportunity. See that really as your higher self is calling you forward and saying, hey, you've outgrown your story. It's time for something more.
Amazing. Karen Parker, thank you so much for coming on and educating us on all of this today. QuantumHumanDesign.com. And where do you get your free chart again? Say it one more time.
FreeHumanDesignChart.com.
Perfect. I knew I was going to mess it up a little bit if I tried, so I appreciate you helping me out. Thank you coming on today. Friends, check the show notes down below for your free chart. Head over, grab that book, and hey, head over to our website. See if you can change your life. We'll see you on the next episode, my friends.